But in that question, I choose to hear, how did you come up with that name and what does it mean? So, so that's what I'm going to answer. A few weeks ago, when Heather and I came up with this idea to do this, she said, what's it called? And so we came up with a list of terrible titles. Color Me Carlucci.
Well, I will say this, actually,
Pizza.
you being the word master came up with a lot of titles, but Psychic Pool Party was your first one, and they kept trying to very kindly say, no, we're no, I think the first one.
Right. Well, so I'm going to explain where that came from. It was, Psychic Pool Party was the very first thing that jumped into my head. And it was actually not the title that came to my head. It was a moment that I'd forgotten about from the mid-90s, a mid-90s flashback that did not involve drugs. When I was working in the marketing department at Arkansas Repertory Theater, we were doing a fundraiser for the theater, and my friend Becky Moore and I were in charge of the silent auction. And we'd received some major donated items for the silent auction, some expensive trips, like walk-on roles for popular television shows, all that kind of stuff. But the most challenging of the donations that we got were these little donations that on their own might not even get a single bid. So Becky and I were creatively grouping the small donations into hopefully larger, desirable packages.
Yeah.
And a board member had donated their opulent and stately backyard for an afternoon party of 8. And it was kind, but it felt really weird to bid on going to somebody else's backyard and have a private party. But it just felt odd to both of us. We couldn't imagine. I mean, it was so generous of this board member, but still it felt really weird. But we'd also received a group reading from a local psychic and a case of purple passion.
Ooh.
So Becky knew that the board member's backyard had this gorgeous, enormous swimming pool. So she grouped them together and called it Psychic Pool Party, and everyone wanted to go.
Of course.
And why are we called Psychic Pool Party? Because everybody wants to go.
Everybody wants to go, right? You hear that and it's like, what? I don't know what that is, but I want to go.
That's right.
That's my story.
It's a good story.
Thanks.
And there's your question. That's so awesome.
And that's my question, I know. So 30 years later, the Psychic Pool Party has been revived quarantine style.
Love it.
Sans purple passion, but we'll work on that.
Okay.
Maybe instead we can get Curious Elixir to be our sponsor.
We're working on it, right?
I know, I
We're working
know.
on it.
Okay, so here we are in this Psychic Pool Party. Nobody gets sunburned or sex chlorine up their nose. The kids are fine. So let's spend this perfect poolside hour getting to know our special guest. Heather, will you show her on stage while
I will.
Thank you. Dr. Maya is a conventionally trained pediatric neurologist and also an herbalist, shaman, and author of The Dirt Cure. She self-describes, "I'm weird and I'm proud of it." Please welcome Dr. Maya Shetreat.
Hey!
Hi.
You're welcome.
All right, let's take off the sunglasses. Hi.
I'm so happy you wore them. Hi, welcome.
Here, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So just to get us started, would you walk us through how you came to be your multi-hyphenate?
Well, exactly. You know, I was thinking as you were talking about that I think it's a very kind of capitalist way of thinking to assume that we should be these narrow, very efficient, kind of cut all these parts out of ourselves so that we could become useful and successful and productive in this one area, when obviously I am that as well. And I definitely did the whole, you know, the doctor thing, I think, for many reasons. I mean, you know, we have our destiny, we have our karma in each lifetime, but also, you know, there's a lot of magic that kind of happens around us when we bring in and invite in all these different parts of ourselves. And so for me, you know, I think I was really naturally a sort of a ceremonialist and, you know, little nature being from, you know, the get-go. And then I had to kind of suppress all that and quiet all that down because it was too weird to be part of a doctor, and then it kind of kept peeking out in a lot of different ways, and I'd get in trouble for it, but then I finished my training, and, it's sort of a long story, and I wrote about it in my book, The Dirt Cure, but, my son got sick, and he's sort of my muse, and always sort of brings me in the direction that I need to go. And so I studied herbalism, officially studied herbalism, started integrating that into my practice. Then later, he sort of drew me to studying with indigenous communities through another kind of challenge that came up. And I started to do a lot of deep work of actually even going into my own ancestry. My family is Moroccan, and they're from the Atlas Mountains, and actually Berber. And I started learning of my own kind of indigenous background. My grandmother got married when she was 9 years old and had more than 12 babies, many of whom died, but my dad was one of 11. So, it's been an interesting journey, and I think that actually our gift is to try to integrate all these different parts of ourselves rather than being multi-hyphenate. It's like, why do we have to be one thing at all?
Mm-hmm.
Indeed. Yeah. Agreed. It's so interesting. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say every part matters. All the
That's right, all the parts. I'm going to jump in with a question. I have a question, actually. You and I have obviously have conversations before, but I was really wondering, I'm always curious about this, when you're doing, when you're doctoring more allopathic work, right? I was always sort of curious, and I always like talking about this, but you're still Maya, right? In the doctor's office. It's still you. What do you think you bring, especially now everything is you're much more like uncovered, right? You're out, it's all there. When you're in that environment, which is it can be very sterile, it's very, based on everything we know as far as the patriarchy goes, and yet a necessity to some extent in our world, the way it is now. What do you think begins to pull into it? I can't imagine you not being in that room with a patient and not basically downloading everything that you need, especially since you have such a fine-tuned sense of where you're from, how we got here, and what matters.
So first of all, I'm not anymore in a sterile doctor's environment. This is my office that you see right now. So it's definitely not, your typical sterile environment. And, we could go into the conversation of what I think about being sterile and bring in some of what I wrote about in The Dirt Cure, because I actually think it's pretty relevant right now with how we're living, and really.
Well, let's do that then.
Yes,
Because we all want to know about it.
Yeah, so I'll answer your first question really briefly then, and just say, it's a process of uncovering. I think that for any of us, perhaps, but certainly those of us who have chosen the more conventional path in some way, that revealing, like at first it became really stressful for me to kind of admit I was doing, integrative medicine. And then it was a challenge that I had to overcome to, be able to talk about, I was writing a book called The Dirt Cure, and having this book out there with all my ideas in it. And then it was, I study with indigenous communities and ethnobotany. And then, so each layer, becomes, it's like another thing being revealed, another kind of layer of the onion being peeled back in a sense. And again, I think that just goes back to what we said before, which is here I am, and I'm the right person for some people, or maybe many people, and maybe not for other people,
Mm-hmm.
But I'm certainly not still in a conventional medicine environment. And I think it's interesting because someone asked me, so I wrote a book called The Dirt Cure. It came out 4 years ago, Simon & Schuster, and it got a lot of attention at the time. And someone meant, very early on in this whole epic that we're in right now, said, do you take back your theory, right? Because the theory of my book, The Dirt Cure, is that there are 3 things that are foundational for health. And those 3 things are being exposed to germs and microbes, eating fresh food from healthy soil, and getting out into nature. And my book has over 700 references in it because I'm good at that game. The science is there, in other words, and I want everyone to see that, they can find the research that supports everything. But really what it says is that basically all the things that we're doing right now, in a sense, if we apply it to now, is that we might be harming our immune systems if we do this in a long-term way, which, kind of to back up, because I think everyone feels afraid right now, and everyone feels nervous about contracting this, novel virus. But when you're in a situation where you don't have a cure for something or a really good treatment, what is the one thing that you can do to protect yourself? It's to be more resilient, right? I mean, that's really, really what, that's because the stressors are going to come. There are different challenges, different stressors, whether it's COVID, whether it's something else, they're always around and they come in whatever ways they present themselves. But really, the thing that we can do where we have agency, and we truly do have agency, is in making ourselves more resilient, physically, emotionally, spiritually resilient. And part of what COVID's doing is making us more resilient in a certain sense, just from an energetic standpoint. From a physical standpoint, we're seeing all this data coming out that people who have low vitamin D are much, much, much more likely to have a really bad course with this virus, just as one example. We know that people who are who have a certain microbiome, which are the 3 to 5 pounds of organisms, microscopic organisms that live in and on your body and make you healthy. If you have a certain makeup of your microbiome, so certain bacteria and organisms are dominant, you're more likely to have a difficult course versus having a different makeup. So there are things in what you eat, in how you're, maybe taking certain supplements, and of course having a really diverse microbiome is a really critical part of being healthy and having a healthy immune system. And how do you get a diverse microbiome? Well, you get outside into nature. That's one thing, whether it's Central Park, whether it's your backyard, whether it's the forest. You actually, hang out with your pets and have that exchange of microbes. You hang out with other people, your family or other people. And there's a lot of data that shows that, every time we're together with other people, we share microbes in a really important way that actually strengthens our immune system. So, we really have to ask ourselves in the long term, if pulling up in our homes and apartments, not getting sunshine, not being around other people, not, getting into nature, all of these different things, if that's really going to benefit our terrain, right? Our body terrain, to really be able to fight all these different, rather than expecting some, magical cure to come down.
So let's you have outdoors, I have outdoors, right? Mm-hmm. Doing Graciela are in apartments in New York City right now. So other than, let's say, and from what I know, I don't think Graciela has a pet right now with her. And I know Joey and his partner don't, because we're going to be sharing one soon. So, but my question is, other than maybe getting out and running over to the park, what can other people do? Because there is, put upon us a great sense of being singular, of being, solitary right now. What can we do to make sure that nobody's walking into what they think is going to be detrimental to their health in seeing other people.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot actually, there's a lot in our mindset and attitude around that. And, you know, hopefully this audience that's coming for Psychic Pool Party can get down with that idea that, you know, being that, you know, if we feel scared of each other, that actually, you know, I'm just going to kind of give a little quick medical explanation of why being in fear is actually kind of harmful. So, you know, when we're in fear, it actually activates our sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is our fight or flight or freeze or please, right? It's sort of our people pleasing, but also that fight or flight, we're going to run away from the lion kind of feeling. And that actually increases our inflammation. So for those of us who are worried because we have autoimmune conditions or immune, you know, dysfunction, it's actually not great to be in that, particularly for a long period of time. Sure, we need to have it now and then, but a lot of us are in sympathetic overdrive, you know? So being in parasympathetic kind of that nourishing rest and digest, we call it, is a way that we actually have a more balanced immune system. The more that we're out of our fear mind, and the fear mind is also taking you into kind of your primitive, you can't see around you, right? When you're afraid, you have very focused way of looking at things, and all you can see is those things. And that's of course very effective if you're running for your life. But when you're in a more parasympathetic, calm state, you're expansive. You can see in all directions, and you have better subtle awareness. And you're more creative, and you're actually in many ways safer in a certain sense, in a long-term way, right? Because you're able to perceive the nuance, where right now we're really seeing, you know, I feel like there's two group psychoses going on. One of them is, you know, if you don't put your mask on and you don't, you know, kind of isolate yourself and stay in your, you know, one room of your home kind of thing and never leave, then, you know, you're like a murder weapon walking around, you know, or you're asking to die. And then the other extreme is all the people who are like, this isn't real, and there's nothing going on, and this is a, you know, a complete hoax, and, you know, the New World Order is about to take over. And there's sort of these very extreme, and there could be that there's some truth to each end of that. Like, lots of things can be true, and when we're not in our sympathetic overdrive, fight, flight, freeze kind of mode, we're able to perceive the nuances and not be so black and white and not be so extreme. So I think, you know, there's a lot of value to understanding that, you know, I'm a big fan of hand washing. Like, I think that's fine. Use just regular soap. You know, there's a reason hand sanitizers in many ways have fallen out of use prior to this, and it's because there were chemicals in it that were actually incredibly harmful and potentially cancer causing.
That's right.
And in addition to that, even just hand sanitizer in general, you're actually increasing your, by decreasing the number of kinds of bacteria you're exposed to, you're actually increasing the possibility that one kind could grow out of control and cause an infection. So when I talk about diversity of organisms, what I mean is our immune systems are actually very social. They like to meet and greet. They're very like friendly in a sense, believe it or not. And they want to kind of know all the different organisms that are coming through. They want to know all the different food compounds and even toxins and just whatever comes its way. And then the immune system is sort of like, oh, like, you're okay, you're okay, you're okay. And then it's very good at mobilizing when there's really, really, really something that's not okay. When we don't get to meet and greet lots and lots of different things, and we limit it, then it's much more likely to react to just anything in a really problematic way. It's going to think everything's an enemy. And that's what autoimmune disease is. And that's what allergies are, is sort of this thinking someone's an enemy, like you yourself is an enemy, or milk is an enemy, or peanuts are an enemy, whatever, or pollen, right? But really it's not an enemy. It's just an entity. So what we want is to have these very healthy, balanced, and resilient immune systems. And what that means too is we need challenges. Challenges are medicine for us. Immune challenges, just like when we're going through an experience like this collectively, it's a collective challenge that hopefully is going to help us become more resilient. What we're seeing right now is how fragile basically every single part of our society is, how either ineffective or fragile, you know? So this is sort of like collective resilience that we're developing.
What I find fascinating about this is that everything that you've said reads, when I read, whether it's medical work or people ask me to do predictions of the world, every single point you said always comes through in the reading. Every single thing, everything you've said always comes in on sort of how we work. Of course, what you were talking about, fight or flight, or I like what you said, freeze or please, which I think is sort of like the modern version of that, because we don't have to worry about the stampeding buffalo across the plains and learning about it fast, right? This all comes through, and it all goes back to like how trauma sits in the body as a big blanket, which I think is very much part of our language right now. It's all part of our language.
Yeah, definitely.
I think we have a question here. Oh, we have a question.
Yay.
Should I read it, Joey? Oh, you're muted, honey.
Hello, I'm back.
Okay.
Sorry, it's from Mark. It's my boyfriend. He says, amen to Maya's point about over-resilience and on hand sanitizer, at least prior to the pandemic. Given what she just said about naturally building immunity, what about Sweden's approach, allowing herd immunity to develop? Is that a better way?
Great question.
It's a great question. I don't think we totally know the answer to that yet. It's still in process, but what I think is really, really important to consider is that there's a lot of competing narratives going on right now. And I think that it's a little bit on purpose, to be honest. I think that there's a kind of a desire in some way for us to feel disempowered right now. You know, just this sort of way that like tests, do they work? Do they not work? You know, everyone should get a test. No one should get a test. There are no tests. The tests are inaccurate. The tests are contaminated. You know, there's this whole feeling of just total chaos. And I don't think that that chaos is, it doesn't need to be this way, you know? I think there is a sense, and we could make it political or not, you know, who even really knows? There is definitely a way that I think we're being kept very confused, and it feels a little bit intentional. You know, like how many people are dying? Why? What are they calling COVID death? What are they not calling COVID deaths? Is it really, you know, are they including the flu? Are they including, you know, like if someone, you know, died and happened to have COVID, is it a COVID death? Is it not a COVID death? So there's just a lot of confusion, and I think it's, so it makes it very difficult to really objectively assess what's happening in Sweden versus what's happening here versus what's happening in Europe. And even as they look at the strains, you know, the strains are like, oh, well, we don't think that, you know, the strain in France is the strain that came from China or Italy, you know. But what I'll say is this. If we really go with this idea that this is incredibly contagious and we're all going to be exposed to it, which people, that is what they're saying. So this idea that someone's not going to get it, you know, I mean, I already had it. I had it in February before this was even a thing here, really, you know, and it sucked. It really sucked. And I had, you know, my herbs and my, you know, supplements that I took, and I made a video about it, you know, that I put out there for free so that anyone literally could go and see exactly what I recommend and sort of the science behind it. But, you know, if it is something that they expect most people would contract, then sitting around, you know, basically sheltering in place is really just, it was really all flattening the curve, is so that not everybody gets sick at the same time and we don't overwhelm the health system. It's not really so that no one would get it. And I think that's kind of one of the most important parts of this is just to know that, like, this isn't about not contracting this virus, and that most people will actually be completely fine. And in fact, most people won't even know they had it, probably. The vast majority of people, and that there are ways in the meantime that we strengthen our immune system. So, you know, I think Sweden's approach, and what I know about Sweden is that they are doing a lot of, I don't want to say sheltering, but they're not, you know, just all living life completely as normal. They are kind of limiting, you know, contact in certain ways. They're doing their part to not overwhelm a health system and so on, but they're just not doing what we're doing, which is also, let's add to this whole stress layer, shutting down all small businesses, basically. You know, it's
and without saying, okay, nobody has to pay rent for 3 months, which ideally, if we had a system that supported us, we would be doing, right?
Yeah. So what we're doing here is like, that's why I feel it feels much more intentional in a sense than, you know, if I look at what's happening, and I'm not saying other countries are so fantastic in every way, but at the same time, you know, here we have this sort of sense of American exceptionalism, and how we have this amazing, you know, country with all these, you know, with all this wealth, with all these, you know, productive people and businesses, and then, you know, boom, you know, every other country shutting down is giving people 80% of their salary or some significant portion of their salary, while also giving them free healthcare, you know, when I say free, but, you know, like universal healthcare, and suspending mortgages and rents. And here we are in the United States, where some people are getting $1,200. Some people are getting unemployment, and you know, nobody's really having rent or mortgage suspended, and nobody has universal healthcare, really. So, you know, it's a very, we have a lot of layers. And I think, again, this is a lot about this fear that we've all, I think, at some point or another, some of us ongoing, and some of us, you know, have kind of, I think, learned to manage it or overcome it. I think this is actually not new fear. I think this is a release of fear that we already have been holding in ourselves, and that we just manage and suppress. And that what we're seeing right now is actually a huge release of fear that was already there. And that hopefully, you know, those of us who can be aware of this can help midwife everybody else through kind of this birth canal that we're in, so that we don't let ourselves get ruled by fear going forward.
Yeah. We've got another question, Maya. This is from Carol Brown. Hi, Carol.
Hi, Carol.
Would you recommend the use of natural herbs in its original form, or are mass-produced herbs in powder or pill form okay?
You know, I as a MD, you know, I prescribe a lot of botanicals in, you know, the form of tinctures and capsules, and not everyone can get all the different things that they need, you know, easily at their fingertips. I do make a lot of my own medicine for myself and my family, and I'm lucky enough to have, you know, I live in New York City, but not in Manhattan, and I have a space where a lot of things grow. So I'm able to harvest. I have on my Instagram, you know, making violet tincture, which is incredible for your lymphatics and for your respiratory system, actually, and for breast health. It's like an amazing, amazing herb, and it grows everywhere. If you probably went into, you know, any park right now, you'd find a lot of wild violets, and you can make medicine from that. However, yes, I think you can buy it. I like to support smaller herbalists. I think there are a lot of wonderful companies, but you can also get the mass-produced stuff if you need it. I think it's effective. I think it's way better than a lot of what's out there right now, which is, you know, pharmaceuticals. I mean, think about that. That's mass-produced and usually very often derived from plants, actually. But what they do is, instead of having this very complex, plants are complex like universes, like we are. And so a plant has thousands and thousands and thousands of different kinds of compounds. Plants have like a personality. Plants actually, you know, when we ingest a plant or work with a plant, it's like we develop new compounds together, because it's like, you know, like when you fall in love, how those new compounds kind of exist. And when you interact with a plant, these two universes coming together, it's all these new beautiful compounds that kind of exist and do all this work in your body. So as opposed to a pharmaceutical that might take one compound from the plant and strengthen that, and it comes on like a sledgehammer. So I do recommend botanicals. I think there's a lot of very wonderful things that have helped us through literally our entire evolution as human beings. We've relied on plants, except for maybe the last 50 years. You know, a little more than 50 years, maybe now 60, 70 years. You know, as concerned as some people are about plants and herbs and, you know, what they can do or if they could be harmful or not as effective, number 3 cause of death in this country is iatrogenic death. It's like basically medical mishap and drugs that kill people accidentally, you know, not really like the things that we do in the medical system that actually are harmful to people and cause them to die. So for me, you know, part of why I even ever got interested in working with food and working with nutrients and vitamins and plants and all the other things that I use in my work with healing is because I felt I wanted to find things that were low risk and potentially very high yield. And I almost never have to prescribe drugs to people.
That's amazing. So I just want to get a little more specific with what you were talking about. You mentioned earlier vitamin D and kind of those of us who are indoors all the time, we have a general lack of that. Are there, very generally speaking, are there foods and other supplements of any stripe that you would recommend sort of generally for the stress and isolation that we're all in at this moment?
For stress, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, some things are just very easy to access. And the thing I love about plants too is that they're the people's medicine, you know, so it's accessible and it's something, they're there, they want to help us, you know. In my program, I have a certification program and I teach people how to communicate with the earth and how to listen to the earth. And we do a lot of deep dive into plant consciousness and the science and the wisdom, the ancient wisdom and the indigenous wisdom around plant consciousness and animal consciousness and how plants and animals are teachers to us, you know, and what our gifts are that allow us to receive that, and how supported we can be by a family that is non-judgmental and they're, you know, ready to really help us. So yeah, there are a lot of wonderful things for staying calm. And food, I mean, you know, I love tea because tea is really kind of on the sort of juncture between food and medicine. So things like chamomile tea, which is super simple, very easy to get. If you're going to get tea bags versus, you know, a bag of tea, you're going to want to use more of it. So you might use like 4 to 6 bags to get really the medicinal effect of chamomile, you know, unless it's like a child. But chamomile is a wonderful calming tea. Another one that I like a lot is lemon balm. Lemon balm is called the gladdening herb. It actually is uplifting. It can help you feel happier. It's also calming. So I love that. Peppermint is actually invigorating. And, you know, I find myself that, you know, sometimes even though I do have nature nearby and I'm able to get outside and I keep chickens, and I actually am keeping chicks right now. If you hear a little cheeping, it's because there's chicks in my office right now. You know, and I, you know, get to enjoy that kind of interaction. But, you know, it can feel very dulling to just sort of have this sameness day in and day out. And so having something that can kind of invigorate you, and that can also be with essential oils. It doesn't even have to be something you're ingesting. Like peppermint essential oil is something really like, it's an awakener. you know, and it can feel invigorating. So I love that. I'm trying to think what else. From a tincture standpoint, I love things for calming. I love milky oats. Wild milky oats is what it's called, and you can get it in a tincture form, and it's basically for 1 week out of every year, the wild oats that just grow have a milky substance they exude, and if you tincture it at that time, you gather it and, you know, put in alcohol, which luckily there are herbalists do for you, then you can have this tincture, which is very gentle. I use it even in young children, non-sedating but calming. And so it's a really, really nice herb for just being chill, you know, and not feeling sedated or kind of out of it. And passion flower is another one that I love for that. And you can get that in tincture form. You can get that in pill form. And I really like that. Actually, passion flower has been investigated in studies comparing it to certain benzodiazepines, you know. So that's like, you know, the category of like Valium kind of medications. And it's actually for mild to moderate anxiety, it's as effective. It's just, it kicks in a little more slowly, but it's less likely to cause any kind of cognitive compromise, essentially, right? Like, don't operate big machinery when you're on like certain pharmaceuticals. You don't have that problem with passion flower. So those are just some of the really calming, nice herbs that either you can drink or you can, you know, or you can just take as a supplement.
I'd like to sort of add also for everybody that you sent, when you were saying that you did a video on the things that you put aside and made sure that you had for when you felt that you had the virus. I have to tell you that your mailers are great, and you give an enormous amount of information for free. So anybody should sign up on your website, because you do list everything that you have and need.
Yeah, I tried. I mean, you know, and this is what I've used with tons and tons of, you know, of my patients, you know, as well, people who have, and family, you know, who have had this. And, you know, one of the top things I'll just say is like ginger tea is one of my very favorite. So fresh ginger, not, you know, dry ginger, but getting the root, chopping it up, about piece about the size of your thumb, put it in a pot of water, bring it to a boil, simmer it for about 10 to 30 minutes, and then keep just drinking, add honey, because it should be a little spicy. It should have a bite. And I add, you know, a spoon of raw honey, and then I just drink that. And if you're drinking it once a day or drinking it a lot during the day, that's an incredible way to support your lungs, to support your immune system. It's antiviral. It's actually good for your digestion, which is another thing.
I do that a lot, actually.
Yeah, it's incredible. And actually, I found it one of the most effective treatments for when I was having, you know, all the breathing stuff.
It's so interesting. I didn't know that until I saw it on your website. But what I did notice is that the first trip to the grocery store after we all got put into lockdown that my boyfriend and I made, we were noticing what items were difficult to find and what there was plenty of, and how peculiar that was in our particular neighborhood in Washington Heights. What can you absolutely not find? And there was no ginger to be found. Not that we went there going to look for ginger, we just noticed, wow, the ginger bin is gone.
Yeah.
Like gone, and it was gone for weeks.
Right, the Caribbean communities know this, though.
That's what I was going to say, is in a more ethnic community,
yeah,
I'm sure that was not true everywhere. Right. But also because I'm Moroccan, and, you know, for me, one of the first things, like, you know, everyone goes to, what do I need, absolutely need in my house right now? And what I was thinking was, I need turmeric, cayenne, paprika, you know, I need my cumin, you know, I need my Moroccan spices, or I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to get through this kind of feeling, you know, garlic, like that's what I ran to get, you know, and I think it's true. It's absolutely true that, you know, more ethnic communities we're more connected in a lot of ways to those you know, we call them folk remedies because there's this desire to spin, you know, what's scientific and clinical and proven, you know, as being the good stuff, and what, you know, we have passed down from generation to generation to generation, which, by the way, works and has gotten us through, especially with no universal health care. You know, and yet we call that kind of the folk remedies, but yeah, absolutely, ginger would be gone. Yeah.
Well, you know, yes, it's so interesting to hear you talk about your Moroccan background and the things that you gravitate toward when you need stuff. And I'm just sitting here judging the people I come from, because we would be reaching for Velveeta and Scotch.
Well,
maybe Snickers and Tang.
If it's a weekend.
Right.
I do often buy out vodka, like kind of the cheap vodka at the store, but it's because I'm making tinctures, to be fair. Not that I don't have my other, you know, mixed drinks I like to make. I'm not trying to, you know, why do I grow so much mint? I mean, like, I'm like, oh yeah, we're gonna have mojitos this summer, but, yeah, when they see me coming and buying my 8 big bottles of vodka, I don't know what they're thinking, but I'm going home and making, you know, all my little potions and tinctures with them.
I'm going to speak from a total place of ignorance. Can you tell me what a tincture is specifically?
Yeah. So a tincture is basically, and this might be something if you go to a health food store or Whole Foods and you see these little bottles, little dropper bottles, you know, with all different kinds of names on them, and you're like, oh, like, what's that? So a tincture is basically when you harvest a plant, you know, you gather a plant of some kind, and you, it could be the leaves, it could be the flowers, it could be the root, it could be a combination, it could be bark, it could be the fruit of berries, you know, it depends on, you know, and you do need to have some knowledge around that. And you basically infuse it into alcohol, and the alcohol extracts out some of the really important medicines that live inside of those different parts of the plant.
Dr. Meyer, are you telling me that I could have healthy vodka?
Yes, yes.
Right.
Yes, and actually I'll give you one example right now, which is, so you know how bitters like are, I mean, and now it's become like a real thing. Bitters are like, you know, well, I don't want to say now. I mean, I feel like it's been at least the past 5 to 10 years that, you know, they've become very hipster. But, but you know, bitters have been around forever, and they are actually incredibly beneficial, you know, with or without a cocktail. And the reason why is because we have bitter receptors, not just in our mouths, but also throughout our entire digestive tract. And
really?
Yeah, throughout our whole body, actually. So bitters exist, these bitters activate, they increase your gut motility so that you're, you are less likely, you know, to have bloating or, you know, burping or that kind of stuff, because things move through normally. They increase your stomach acid, which boosts your immune system. That your stomach acid is part of your immune system. You know, they also increase your detoxification in your liver. They stabilize blood sugar and insulin levels. They boost the full immune system, even in your ear, nose, and throat. They make you a little sharper in your, you know, we have bitter receptors even in our brain. And so those bitters that, you know, would be in those aperitifs that we drink are actually part of, you know, we drink them before we eat, and it actually primes your body for digesting better and having a normal and balanced immune response. And maybe even, you know, if there was going to be a little bacteria that your body might not like in the food that was to come, your body would be ready because your immune system is primed. And the reason why is because when you know, poison actually is very often bitter. And so this is like bitters in regular foods like dark leafy greens, or in hops, which is in beer, or in dark chocolate, or zest from an orange, right? Like all these different kinds of ways, or even coffee. You know, all of those bitter compounds actually are preparing your body in a way. This is actually a perfect example of stressors that increase your resilience, which kind of brings us back to what we were talking about before, because basically your body perceives them as tiny poisons, tiny, tiny, tiny poisons. And there's this concept of something called hormesis, which is that when you have a tiny poison, tiny, it actually boosts the function of the cells in your body, which boosts the function of your organ systems and boosts the function of your overall health, basically, by those little stressors coming. So what your body does when you have that little bit of bitter greens, or, you know, you have your aperitif, is it thinks, oh no, is this the poison? And everything, all the cells in your body stand up and say, I'm gonna be more optimal right now. I have to be ready for whatever's to come. And that makes you more resilient. And that's sort of boosting your whole terrain, essentially, which is really what we need to be doing. So I'm not exactly giving the advice that we should all be downing a lot of cocktails, but if you're gonna have bitters in your cocktail, then, you know.
I hear you, Dr. Maya. I want to go back up for a second to when you're talking about tiny, tiny poisons.
Yes.
Ideally, that was sort of the original idea behind a vaccine, some vaccines, right? Is actually to inject a little bit. I'm talking about the original concept, not what vaccines necessarily have become, but sort of injecting the poison into the body to create resistance. Yeah?
In a sense, I mean, really what vaccines originally were, and I think continue to be, you know, at least presented as, is really about taking a small amount of the microbe of interest, to introduce it in such a way that it activates the immune system without causing symptoms. That was, I think, the thinking, right, behind it is, we're going to do this infection, but in a controlled way that doesn't lead to all the potential negative outcomes that could happen with this microbe. That, I think, was the thinking behind vaccines, you know, and is still, I think, the thinking, you know, in the larger medical community. So yes and no, but yes, in a sense, we're going to make you more resilient by giving you a little bit of this. So in that sense, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. If any of the people watching have any other questions, please just enter them in and we will get to them as we can. I am curious to come back to something that I think Heather touched on with her first question. And I'm wondering if you would spend a little more time with that, which is, you are a doctor and yet you are also yourself. And one of the things that I have run into, Heather knows the specifics about this, and I'm not going to go into it, about a condition that I have that I've been struggling with to find somebody to help me with for the last 5 years. And I've been through 4 GPs. I've been through 6 specialists, 3 of whom were neurologists, and all of the neurologists, all of the men, I guess that goes without saying, right? Immediately said to me, before I could even finish telling them what was going on, that's not a thing. Like, it just was, there was no test.
Yeah.
There was no investigation. And then I would continue because I'm paying people. So I at least want to be heard. And so I continue, but I can see they're already closed to receiving any more information. They don't want to know any of my observations. So what I'm wondering is for you, that had to be so tricky to navigate, coming through a formal medical education and not divorcing yourself from your own common sense, your own intuition, your own sense of curiosity. Can you talk a little bit about what that's like for you?
Yeah, you know, so that what you're describing is one of my real pet peeves. Pet peeve is probably a understatement of, you know, what I see in medicine. And of course, I've always felt it's a kind of medical misogyny, because so often I have women who are coming to see me as parents or as my own patients who have heard exactly that. Like, that can't be true. You know, they're observing something and they're basically, it's gaslighting, right? I mean, what you're being told is what you see in front of your own eyes, and your own experience is not to be believed and is not true. And that is obviously, I mean, it's incredibly harmful, for one thing. It's not addressing, you know, what your professed goal is here, which is to help the person, right? And it's sort of, again, trying to put everything, rather than expanding your perspective by treating the people, your patients or clients, as your teachers, right? Or your partners in this. You know, what you're doing is trying to bring them into your particular worldview or your particular professional perspective. So I have a lot to say, and it is, I do think in a way it has manifested in a way of medical misogyny, but you're bringing out the point that it's really not just that, you know, at all, you know. And I do think that in some way it really applies in marginalized communities of whatever kind, you know, more so than, you know, if you kind of come with, oh, well, you know, these are, you know, you're going to play this game with me and you're going to follow the rules and you're going to listen to me and you're not going to have things that confuse me or take me outside of my paradigm, you know. So that's one thing I would say is, you know, you're bringing up what I think is one of the biggest problems, truly, of modern medicine, and there are so many. But in terms of how did I navigate that, you know, for one thing, I mean, I think I was just perceived as a troublemaker, because not because of what I did, you know, until I finished my training and went on to, you know, truly be a troublemaker. But, you know, it was just the questions that I asked that made people so upset. And it was really just questions, honest questions of me wanting to understand, like, why does everybody here who has neurologic issues seem to also have immune issues? Well, you know, like there'd be this kind of, you know, and it would be from my senior residents, it would be from my attendings, where they just didn't like the questions I asked. And you know, I broke a lot of rules in a sense. I mean, I had children during my training. That's also not, you know, not considered an okay thing, because having a life outside of your training is a problem. So there were many ways I was a troublemaker. You know, and it was interesting because I was actually in pediatrics at the time, because I trained in both pediatrics and in neurology. And, you know, my pediatrics colleagues were maybe some of the most angry people about the fact that I had children during training. So I did not actually totally intend to have the children exactly when I did always, but, you know, they were like, you know, I received a lot of backlash about that. Anyway, but you know what I think about coming through and being someone who did have that paradigm where I do believe the people that I'm caring for, and I do listen to them, and I do think that they are here. You know, we are a team and we learn from each other. And what I always tell the people in my office is, you know, I'm an expert in a lot of different people, you know, and you're the expert in yourself. So we work together to essentially, you know, help you get better as a team. It's a team effort. And if it's just me, you know, I can certainly, and I am very intuitive, and I can see and hear a lot of things that are not always being presented to me, you know, outwardly. But, you know, if you help me, it's always going to make this process a much more effective process. And just as an example, I have had nonverbal people with autism come into my office, walk over to this medicine chest that had different herbal tinctures and different things on it, pick something off and sit and hold it. We have a conversation, you know, with their family, and I examine them, and then the thing they're holding turns out to be exactly what I would have prescribed.
Wow.
You know, just as an example, right? So it's really about tuning in together to what, you know, who is here. And when I'm talking about plants, I will talk about, you know, like she's here to do this or that, but, you know, who is here to help us and how can we call them in? And, you know, again, when we're not in our fear-based paradigm, and we're in that, you know, kind of, we're not in trauma vision, but we're in that kind of multi-directional, you know, awareness state together. And that can be online, or that can be, you know, because it's a field that we share that is not limited by space and time, you know, then that's how we find those different answers. The process of walking through all that for me was a real initiatory process. I believe, you know, these kinds of very difficult experiences are initiation experiences, and maybe that's my sort of shamanic training that is coming out. But, you know, we have to go through these really difficult experiences that are ego dissolving and are sometimes very, very traumatic. I think we're going through one collectively right now. This is a collective initiation that we're in. But for me, you know, medical training, you know, sometimes I've kicked around, you know, well, I'm doing so much more of teaching now, or, you know, and people say, well, you know, you have to still be a doctor. That's so important, you know, and if you can't give up that, you know, and I know no matter what happens down the road, I'll always be a doctor, because, you know, it's not something you can't leave that behind when you've gone through that kind of initiatory experience. It's, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, you know, in my more generous moments, when I reflect on the frustrating reactions that I got from, to use this example that I started with, people who were telling me that's not a thing. In those generous moments, which are few and far between and always forced for me, especially in moments like that, when I'm there asking for help, I know that we live in a society where if you are presenting yourself, well, first of all, where it's just difficult to admit that you don't know something generally, and specifically if you're presenting yourself as any kind of expert, to say I don't know indicates ignorance or weakness to most people, as opposed to really being open and saying, I actually don't have an answer now, but let's see if we can find one, right? But it's that freezer please thing that you were just saying, where you just shift into the fear of, oh my God, I don't know the answer to that, so I'm going to put it back on you. That's not a thing. You made that up. That's not related, right? You're not the expert of your body. It's just quicker, easier, cleaner, and it cuts them off from being the human being that they are, even though it's a very human response.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really, really sorry that you've gone through that. It is really painful and traumatic, and very, it's very vulnerable, you know, to be in a doctor's office and to talk about, you know, things that you're experiencing that are challenging, and then to feel like it's not received with compassion, you know, is its own kind of trauma, you know. That amplifies whatever you're going through, rather than the other way around. It's you know, I think a lot of people don't realize, a lot of physicians and a lot of people in general don't realize that part of the healing process is creating a healing environment, you know, which sometimes is just listening in a kind way. That can be sometimes medicine in and of itself.
Absolutely.
You know, and I think we are taught that in various ways in medical training. They do have a lot of like humanism in medicine, because, you know, a lot of people miss the boat on that. Or they just cut off, as you said, kind of cut off their humanity for various reasons. It is a very, you know, it is a very patriarchal model still to this day. And I think that idea of I don't know is so scary. And one of the things in my certification program, which is not for only doctors, but there are a lot of physicians that go through it, is the idea of unlearning and coming in beginner's mind. That, you know, that idea of always coming as if you're a beginner. It doesn't mean that you're losing everything else that you know and your expertise, but when you come with the idea that you don't know everything, it creates a kind of an opportunity for something new to present itself to you as the expert, as the person who has all that other information and expertise they can tap into. You know, and I would say to you that your challenge here perhaps is really to come in, to come both to yourself and in these situations to come in a place of gratitude and appreciation, because you know, not because you owe it to anybody, but because when you are in that state, it actually influences through your own measurable electromagnetic field, and this has been studied and published by the HeartMath Institute. You actually influence the way they come towards you. Mm-hmm. So it is actually in your interest to be in that place, because it will influence their reaction. And it actually makes you more powerful. And it also, when you're able to authentically be in that place, which takes practice, especially when you're in contact with difficult people, mm-hmm. It actually is more likely to help resolve whatever condition you're experiencing, separately from whatever they offer you.
Yeah, I found that in my readings, I think about 5 years ago when I started doing this full time, there became a place that I get to when I walk into a room with a client or a call or whatever, where it really has nothing to do with me at all. You know, it's like it goes beyond checking your ego at the door, but it has nothing to do with anything except to be present. And my readings become clearer. The interaction becomes much more human and humane. And also, as you were saying, you know, it becomes much more healing for me because it makes me embrace my work more. And that's really, if that's your purpose, you need to be able to embrace it. I had a question on this one and I can't remember what it was.
Well, I was just going to say, we're at 12:05.
Okay, perfect.
So we've been here for an hour, and I feel like we could spend at least another 12 to 15 hours talking to you. Right at the end, you mentioned something that I had bookmarked in my notes that I wanted to ask you about, which is what is a shaman? Can you tell us quickly? And I mean, I know that that's like a whole episode into itself. I realize that. So forgive me for being, if I'm glossing over something, but it's something that I'm so curious about. And I just wanted to give us something little that maybe we could come back and talk about again later.
Sure. Yeah, there are a few things I'm going to say. I mean, so shaman is really a colonized word. It's actually not, you know, what perhaps medicine people or elders or people who do this work would necessarily call themselves. And the original shamans that were described as such were indigenous people in Siberia. And I have learned and worked with some of them. The idea of a shaman is that they are someone who works between the physical world and the invisible world. So the world that we see in front of us and the world that is kind of what's possible, what's beyond what we can see. That's very present and very real if it's someone that is working, you know, in that way. You know, I always hesitate to use that word to describe really anyone, and my own work in particular, because of the nature of the word. So I use it generally in it's a sort of a shorthand way to then, when people are in my world more, can understand a little more of what I'm doing. And I would love to be able to use a different word, honestly, that we could, there are names, for example, for people in my own culture and my own ancestry, and in fact, my own lineage, my own ancestral lineage, that, they have words that are part of the Berber language, and it's sort of interesting because we are little melting pots of people, each of us, that it's a little complicated to say, this is what I am, or this is what I am. But really, it's about navigating between the worlds, between different worlds and realities, and how do we bring those things together in a healing way, and kind of, that's really that midwifing aspect. Yeah.
It's also theater people. It's theater people, Heather. It is.
Well, one of the things I was going to say, and I always have a hard time when somebody uses the word shaman, and one of the things that I always appreciate is that, in knowing you as little or as much as I do, is that one of the things, even the few conversations we've had about your work in particular, and because you have such a thorough background in not only the more conventional medicine world, but you go so deep in both worlds, that to me, like when I would see that on your website, because it's nothing you would ever say. You didn't walk up to me and say like, hi, I'm a shaman. It was never like that. And I was like, she digs so deep, and that sits well with me, because I'm so hypersensitive about these labels that are used now, and people claiming this and claiming that at the welfare of the people around them. And of course the colonization, the cultural appropriation, and everything else behind it. So when I saw that on your website, I was like, I'm fine with that. I didn't even question it. I was like, because you go so deep in every department. And to me, if we're because most of the work I do is medical, it is really just so irresponsible if I don't look as deep as possible into science, because I believe that what I do for a living is in fact based on science. Do we know all the links? No. Are we short-sighted in believing we think we know all the links and what's made up and what's not? No. But I just wanted to sort of put that in there, since you brought it up, Joey, that has always been like the word that ruffles my feathers on so many levels. But I was always fine with it. With Maya, I was like, I get it. Because what word can you use to bring together everything you do? I don't know as many people, actually. I've only known one other person who was one of my first mentors. I didn't think of him that way, but I look back on it now, and he was, that I would honestly say can combine all those attributes.
And I also am a trained astrologer. So it's, again, one of these things where if you're an MD, an herbalist, a writer, a teacher, an astrologer, but really a lot of my work is that going between worlds. By the way, I'm a Scorpio, which means I am a deep dive person, always, obsessively deep dive person, and I was a theater person back in the day.
You do it all.
In high school and college, I was a musical theater person. I sang opera in college too, a little bit. So, I kind of left those days behind, but not entirely. And but yeah, I think it's sort of, how do we describe ourselves? And that kind of brings us, I think it's a perfect way to end, really, because it takes us back to the very beginning when we're talking about all of our identities and how do we identify each other, because no one's going to say, oh, Heather, this, combination of, and kind of throw out 40 different words, or, when we say, what do you do? Which is in this capitalist society, what do you do? What are you good for? How can you be
help me? That's right.
And this, and making money and being a productive, successful human being. We do want to cut out all those different parts. And so it's sort of like this rush to say, okay, here are all the things that I am, and I don't want you to leave any of those things behind, and, you know, include it all. And so we have to find words that are meaningful and maybe make words. You know, in my mind, you know, I think of myself, let's say, as an earth worker, or, you know, like, how are we going to create kinds of, how are we going to create shorthand, you know, or not require shorthand? I mean, what could we
not require shorthand?
You know?
I think that is a big learning thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd love to have you back because I have a whole other topic I would love to get on with you and Graciela.
I know. I was so excited to get to hear about like her cacao. I looked at her Instagram and I was like, oh, like I'm really interested to learn about her ceremonialist work and, you know, all these different things. So
we'll have to do this again. You'll have to come back to the pool.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and hopefully maybe even with a real pool. That would be amazing.
That would be fun.
It would be so good.
I know. We could actually, one day we're going to do this live and we're going to sit around the pool and we're going to talk about
and exchange microbes.
We're going to intermingle our microbes. Oh, with all the cheap vodka that you have.
Absolutely.
I'll bring good gin. I'll bring good gin.
Great.
Whatever. I have nothing to. I'll take whatever.
Thank you so much for being here today. It's a pleasure to spend time with you. I know that we all loved it. So yeah, the limitations of language aside, we'll all just be comfortable. Maybe with this note. My friend John Gale, for years, I don't even know how long, as long as I've known him, whenever anyone says, "What do you do?" his answer is always, "I do well." And he just leaves it at that. And people are always like, is that funny? Is it not funny? I don't understand.
I love that.
A fabulous answer.
It's a fabulous answer.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here. And thank you for the people who stuck out, who hung out with us today.
I know. We've already gotten a shout out on Instagram by someone.
Oh, yay. I love that. Amazing.
Thank you, Maya.
Mwah. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye,
It's so good to
guys.
see everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, Darren. We love Darren.
We do love Darren. Thank you, Darren. Have a great day. Be well.
Bye, everybody.
Peace and love.